The following podcast is a Dear Media production.
I don't know if there's ever been a story told on the Real Stuff podcast that is quite as shocking and personal as this one. Alreen Haeggquist is an author who just in the past couple of years published a book coming out about her childhood and the sexual abuse that she endured by her own father. Major trigger warning for this episode that we are discussing sexual assault and that this story is pretty hard to listen to at times. As the interviewer going into an interview on this topic, I felt a little frozen, and you will notice some moments in this interview where I am genuinely at a loss for words because what do you even say to someone who tells you about this horrific, shocking trauma that they endured in their childhood? Today, Alreen is an author and a sexual harassment attorney, and she's using her voice and her power to stand up for women everywhere in a way that she never stood up for herself, and also in a way that her mother never did for her. This story is raw, honest, and everything that the Real Stuff podcast stands for. A major thank you to Alreen for coming on and for sharing this story with us, and I hope that you all find this conversation empowering. You really do have one of the most intense and traumatic life stories of anyone I've heard, and you have turned that history into such a powerful present in everything that you're doing. For the people in my audience who don't know you and have never read your book, please take us back to Alreen Haeggquist's childhood and bring us into your home.
Sure. So it was terrifying. I guess that's how I grew up. When I think about my childhood, I grew up as a very scared, terrified kid who didn't have anybody to talk to. So my household was my father. And at the time when I was growing up, I think we had 8 siblings that lived together. 2 had been married off. My father was abusive in all the ways. And he was physically abusive, he was verbally abusive, he was emotionally abusive, and he was sexually abusive. And when you're growing up, you don't know that there is anything different. This is just your home and your childhood, and nobody's talking about it. So as a kid, this is all going on, and the adults in the room are seeing it, but nobody's saying anything and nobody's protecting you, including my own mother. And as a kid, you're basically just trying to survive. And this is all stuff that I didn't realize when I was a kid. So I don't know if this was me as a kid, but this is all things that I realized as an adult. My survival mechanism was just to keep it all in, keep all of those emotions of whatever I was feeling as the abuse was going on inside of me, and just getting through day to day. Luckily, I did have my siblings. I guess that helped. I mean, you had someone around, but nobody was talking about, I guess, what they were experiencing, by my father. So that's how I would describe my childhood. It was terrifying, and it was an abusive home.
You are an Indian family. You were born in Pakistan and then you were raised in California, correct?
That's right. So I was the youngest of 10 kids. I was only 2 years old when we moved to the United States. And then my sibling above me is 7 years older. So it was me at 2 years old. And then my next sister is 9 years old. And then it goes from her to, 12. And then everybody else is like a year apart.
What age were you when you experienced your first encounter with any of this abuse?
So the one that I can remember, and my therapist will tell me that the abuse started, before, when I was a baby, right? Like it's so ingrained as how you were growing up. But the incident that I can remember is when I was probably about 4 or maybe 5 years old, and huddled over in a room with my mom, in my brother's room, and with my mom and one of my siblings, I don't remember exactly who, huddled in a corner, crying, with my dad threatening to kill us, and so that's my first memory of my dad, who I just viewed as a monster. Like he was, I didn't have a monster underneath my bed. He was the actual living person of it. And it was, I think the hardest part is you experience something like that, and then you get up, you put a smile on, you put your dress on, and we grew up Muslim. And so we would go to the mosque, right? Like nothing ever happened. And so that's kind of the consistent theme of like this intense experience happened where people are, raging, crying, and then pretending like it just never happened. And we just go on like, a happy family. We put the smile on and we just move on with our day.
In your book, where you've now come out, about this abuse. How detailed are you about what actually happened to you?
So it's the first time I go into any details about what happened to me. And for me, I think I had it the least, I guess, because my sister, with respect to the sexual abuse, when I was about 12, my sister came out and said what my dad was doing. And that was the first time somebody acknowledged that this was happening. And she didn't go into details, but she left the house. And when she did that, the sexual abuse stopped. My dad was still enraged about everything, but that part of it stopped. So I feel like I had the least of it, but all the experiences that I had, not all, but many of the experiences that I had, I go into details in my book.
So the sexual abuse stopped at age 12.
Yes.
When did the sexual abuse start?
My first memory of it was probably like at 9 or 10 years old. And I think, again, you don't even know that it's sexual abuse. You don't put any labels on it. It's just these labels don't happen until you're an adult and you kind of look back to what was going on in your house. Nobody called it sexual abuse or molestation. Like, those words were never used.
At the time, what were the words or the thoughts around it as far as you could articulate?
So when my sister came out and she approached me as to if it had happened to me, and this is probably one of the hardest things. Prior to her leaving the house, we shared a room together, and that's like a really vivid memory for me, was being in my room with my sister and my dad coming in the middle of the night, and my sister just screaming to stop and to not, and saying no. And I was about, like I said, around 12, and me putting the covers over my head, just wanting it to pretend like it didn't happen. And I carry that with me a lot, especially now as an advocate. When people ask me, how do you speak out? And it's because I didn't protect my sister. I was 12 years old. I didn't say anything. And that haunts me. Like, had I said something, would I have stopped whatever was going on that night? That was the last time that I remember that happening in my house. And so that's when she left. And when she approached me, and the question was, did dad ever do anything to you? Right. And I just started crying and I said, yes. And I know he did it to you too. Right. And so there was 0 words, right? Like, what the person, what you're talking about without going into any detail. So the words were, did dad do it? Yes. Right. And so that's all we talked about. And when the sisters got together, the conversation was, do we say anything about what dad did? So it was very not, we didn't put any words to it. It's just, are we going to say anything about what dad did? If we do, he could go to jail. And what would that mean for mom? And that was the conversation surrounding it. And we chose not to say anything, meaning like not to report it outside of the family, because of the consequences it may have.
First of all, just to back up, as a listener of this story, I'm sure you've come across this in telling the story. There are almost no words for how a person can respond to this, aside from, I am so sorry for you that this is something you had to go through in your life and this is something that happened to you. It's so taboo and so not talked about if it's happened in people's families, that people just likely don't know what to say at all. While we're in this zone of me listening to your story and genuinely feeling that loss of words, what do you feel from your standpoint is a good thing or the right thing or a helpful thing for a listener to say in response to you telling them this?
Just like you said, I don't know if there is one. Like, I don't even know what I say to myself, except, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I can see that's not holding you back, right? Like, that does not have this, it's not holding me back. It's not allowing me to continue to suffer like I did back then. So I don't know if there is a right word. You say how you feel. I know it is a taboo subject and it makes people uncomfortable, and I recognize that. But at the same time, by not saying anything, and as we continue to not speak out about it, we're the ones who are continuing to be hurt by it and suffering from it.
And sexual abuse at the hands of anybody is an awful thing and something no one should ever have to experience. But to have it be coming from your own biological father is just a complete next level, the worst possible thing that could be happening at home. And my understanding is that your story and your trauma is incredibly compounded by the fact that your mom was aware of what was happening under the roof and remained silent.
Yes, that's correct. And I didn't realize it then, right? As a kid, I didn't realize, my mom being silent was not right. At that time, she was another like victim to my dad's abuse. She had an arranged marriage at 17 years old, and my dad wanted a lot of kids. And so she gave him a lot of kids. And the way my mom was raised was, there was God, there was man, and then there was woman. And like for her, she was a piece of property that was taken from her family and given to my dad. And so her upbringing was in a way that I don't think she even knew how to stand up. But at the same time, when I had my own daughter, that motherly instinct to protect your child is so natural. Like it just comes on you. And that's when it really, I guess, made me mad for the first time at my mom for all of those years with all of those kids to never say anything and to stand up to him and allowed it to continue happening until this day. I mean, my dad passed. My mom's still alive. Until this day, she cannot recognize, what he did because she always goes back to what a great father he was for not kicking us out, for putting a roof over our head and supporting us, with food and shelter and clothes and all of that. So she still till this day can't recognize, the impact that had on her kids.
You mentioned because you were so young and this is your only experience in a family, not necessarily knowing that something incorrect is happening. But then you also mentioned going out to the mosque or going out with your family and everyone sort of acting like this wasn't happening. So there had to have been some sort of internal voice in your head telling you that what was happening was not right or not good and that it shouldn't have been happening. Do you remember being young and being in the house and doing certain things or avoiding doing certain things to try to ward off his behavior?
I was a really good kid. Like I did, I went to the mosque, regularly. I taught at the mosque. I got straight A's. I was like in, all the, leadership things at school, listened to what my parents said. I didn't talk back, And so for me, like if I was really good and I was on my best behavior and I didn't piss him off, I could control his rage. I could get him to, not curse at me and call me every, vile name. And maybe if I did that with respect to the sexual abuse, I think it was just, like as a kid, I slept in my parents' bed. So you don't sleep in the bed with them. You don't go into their room. And so you avoid certain situations where you feel like maybe I might get myself into something that I don't want. We had locks on our bedroom door, and which I didn't again think of as an issue until I got married. And my husband's like, we don't put, locks on our own doors. We're not trying to protect ourselves from ourselves. And that didn't dawn on me is that's why my sisters had the locks put on the doors. And so those are different things that you did. But for me, yeah, overall, it was just if I be really good, nothing will happen.
What kinds of things would piss him off?
Anything. Anything. You don't really know when somebody's rage is going to go off. And, again, the only way I would describe it is would be a very rageful man. I mean, people describe, he wasn't an alcoholic. He didn't drink, but that's the only kind of, I guess, person that I can think of is like a really, violent alcoholic, except somebody who, didn't take alcohol, but was just triggered by anything, the way you looked at him, the way you spoke to him, something else that happened. He wanted you to say something and you didn't say it that way. It really was anything. And so a lot of times you just try to just not say anything, right? Like, because you don't know what's going to cause it.
Was the knowledge of what he was doing sort of just common knowledge in the house that it went unspoken, but everyone really knew it? And so you knew that your mom knew it? Or was there a point where you went up to her, sat her down, and told her this is what is happening?
So before my sister came out, it was happening in the household and she could see it happening, but nobody's saying anything. And so you didn't really feel like you needed to sit down to tell her because she just saw it happen.
Was that more of the emotional abuse
Yeah,
and the physical abuse?
the physical abuse, not the sexual abuse. My mom was never around for that, but I just believe that there's no way she didn't know that. if he's not in the room in the middle of the night, like where is he going? I just feel like, she was with him for, I don't know, 50 plus years. And I just don't feel like you can be that, you can have your eyes closed that much.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Why do you think she was silent?
I think because of the way she was raised, I really think that she was taught that he was, her master, really. And she couldn't stand up to him and she had to do what he said and how he wanted to run the household. And so my mom would call her, she's like, I was like a goat. I got untied from my family and I got tied to him. And so I just think my mom didn't have the ability and didn't even know she could or how to do it. I don't know. But like I said, for me, I go back to that natural instinct to want to protect your young.
So when your sister comes out about this and leaves the house, and now it's sort of out in the open between you and your siblings of what was happening, but you had not addressed this publicly. Obviously, at this point, you're 12
Yeah.
and you still have your life ahead of you and
Mhm.
schooling. And were you just able to compartmentalize your life really well?
I got really good at just pretending like it's not happening. I mean, really, you were taught at a very young age to just like it's not happening. And that's why I really do think silence is a form of gaslighting. Like, let's just pretend it's not happening. And then maybe you've created, and it's really not that bad, right? Like, you've maybe created something that's worse than it actually is because you go on every day like it's not happening. And so I don't know if I was good at compartmentalizing it. It was just kind of let's pretend like it didn't happen.
Did you ever have moments where you genuinely questioned whether or not it was real?
I didn't question whether or not it was real. I guess, didn't know that it was wrong, right? Like maybe it's not, I'm making it something more than it really is. Like I'm feeling bad about it, but maybe it's really not that bad. He is supporting me. He did get me to this country. He is making my lunch, and so he's a good person. And maybe he just doesn't mean what he's doing, or he doesn't realize how bad it is or how it's hurting me. And I don't even know if I knew that that's what was hurting me at the time, if that makes sense. When I was young, I would, cry to myself in my room and I would pray every day to just be happy and have a family that just didn't yell, like it was just not chaotic. Like the Brady Bunch was like my vision
Mm.
of that like happy family, and that's what I kind of envisioned my life to be like.
Yeah. I want to go back to with your mom and dad and the whole decision to collectively as a family keep this quiet. I want to try to get to the heart of what the worst case scenario was for people of if you did come forward and report your dad and if he were to have been arrested. Do you think it's a cultural thing or a religious thing, or did it have to do with finances and her being on her own? Was it about just the shame and the community? What were the biggest issues at play?
I think all of it at the time when we were talking about it, it was really like finances. My mom never drove till this day. She barely speaks English. And my dad handled all of the finances. They worked together. They had a business together where they catered. So it's not like my mom didn't have skills. It's just he handled all the parts of, living in America that she didn't. He paid, dealt with all the bills. He handled all the money. He conversed with everybody. And her job was just to work and take care of the kids. So I think the fear at the time was if he went to jail, what was she going to do? And who would she be without him? Her identity was so entwined with him as well. With the community aspect, that was also a big aspect. And it still is. That's why it was, again, me coming out, even though it's my story and what happened to me, I did let out the family secret of things people didn't want to share or have known.
This is a very complicated question, but as you're mentioning, he took care of the family, he paid for things, he made my lunch. I'm just thinking about a child's perception of her dad and how even sometimes if you have an aggressive parent or a parent that gets heated and maybe yells at you or even is physically abusive to you, children have this innate desire for their parent to love them and to be loved by them, and they tend to love their parents no matter what their parent has done. Would you say that despite all of this, you loved your father?
For sure. If and that's what another kind of interesting part of this whole thing is, when I went to college, my dad would visit me at college. I introduced him to all of my friends. We've traveled together. We've traveled with my husband. And so that's I guess, the dichotomy of the issue. It's like, this is happening, but yes, he's still your father. You still love him. You have a relationship, and he does do other things with you that is not just being abused. And my therapist always talks about it. He's like, it's actually easier if he was just an abusive, horrible person, because then you don't have that conflict of who this person is. And kind of what I was telling you, is it really that bad? And am I making him worse than he actually was?
So I want to get to a little bit later in life. The abuse stops at age 12. And I'm assuming when your sister left, the family dynamic changed.
Yeah. I mean, my dad went into this really intense rage at that time because he went into the denial, right? When he was confronted about it, he denied it. He said it never happened and that she was just making it up. And nobody, I would say, supported her in the sense. It became her who was bringing this up and her saying these things. He made all of these threats that he was going to kill her. And it was awful because I was the only one left at home with him. So then it became me, my dad, and my mom, the last three remaining in the household. And so that lasted probably, I would say, until I left for maybe a year before I graduated high school. It was just a really intense, rageful time. And then I figured out that I could get out of the house by going to college. And so I was the first to go to college, and I figured out how to apply and how to get money to go away. And that, to me, I focused all of my attention in high school of like just getting out of the house.
And when you met your partner in college, who is that your current husband?
Yes.
So when you meet your future husband, do you tell him this right away?
No. When I tell my husband and like the close friends that I still have, that I just had an abusive father. He wasn't the kindest person, and it was just hard living with him, but he just gets really angry. And so I kind of just like surface leveled it. And again, they met him, you're right. Like, so they've all met him, and nobody knows really like the details, right? Like what you were saying, you could have a dad who, might not do the kindest things, but also does some great things, and we're not just going to talk about the bad things that he did.
At what point in your marriage do you open up to your husband?
Probably not till maybe until like I had my daughter. So I would say maybe 15 years later, something like that.
And at this point, was your dad still alive?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know that your dad had passed, and I was going to ask you, where is he today? And,
Okay.
Is he behind bars right now, or is he passed? And I was thinking to myself, if she tells me that her dad is passed by now, I really want to try to understand if she thinks this story and this book and this whole situation would be different right now if he were still alive. Do you feel it's been easier for you to come forward because he's not here to react?
I think so. Like when he was still alive, I didn't want a kid, right? I didn't want my own kids. And so my husband and I didn't have my daughter until, 15 years after we were together. We were married for 10 before we had her. And
Is that because you were afraid for your children's safety?
yeah, I don't think I realized it at the time, but the fact that he passed and a year later we decided to have kids and we had my daughter Maya makes me believe that was really it. Like it was a form of protection from him even before she was born. So yeah, I do think it was easier to tell the story about him with him passed. I was also sexually abused by two other members of my family who are still alive, and so it has become a little because my siblings were were close, and so when all these things come out, it's been a challenging, I guess, part of the family dynamic. And my mom's still alive, right? So I'm telling the story while she's still alive, except for the fact that I told you she barely speaks English. So when I'm saying these things, she probably doesn't even know. She never acknowledged it then, so she's not really acknowledging it now. So the mother-daughter dynamic hasn't really changed. It's still the same with her, just again pretending like it never happened.
And you sort of alluded to it before, but telling a family secret story like this, where you're opening up about your dad having done this stuff to you as well as to your other siblings, there's an element to that of you coming out and airing other people's trauma who maybe weren't at a place where they wanted it shared, or maybe that's, in their healing journey, it maybe felt like maybe added trauma to have a tell-all about the trauma. Is that something that has caused any sort of rift between you and your siblings, and what's your relationship with them now?
So totally, that was a really tough decision, right? How do you tell your story without telling your family's story? And I didn't know how to do it, right? Because we all had the same father. It has created like where people, were upset with me because they didn't understand why I needed to come out, right? Like why go talk to a therapist? You don't need to write a book about it. And so that was hard. But at the same time, when as I work through therapy, I can't cause trauma, right, by telling my story. Their trauma is already there. But yes, what you pointed out, right, when your first question, which is they weren't ready. Like I forced an issue on them that they weren't ready to address, right? I've been on this path to heal myself, almost 15 years and going through a lot of self work, lots of therapy, lots of different modalities to get to this point where I can be on a podcast talking to you about it, right? This is not something just overnight you just say, hey, I'm going to talk about it to everybody.
Right.
That took me a long time. For my family and my siblings, I recognized they weren't there and I've pushed the issue. And so now it's been, I guess it'll be almost 2 years. It'll be 2 years in the fall where this has come out. And I think we're healing together, right? Like I have forced an issue, but it needed to, I guess, happen in some way because they were continuing to carry it as well. So that's a very long answer to yes, it has created a rift. But I think just like anything, time is going to heal it and allow them to also, I guess, grow from it, from the experience as well.
Are all of them going through their own therapy and treatment?
No, they didn't have all the tools that I've been developing for the past 15 years.
To go back to that time period between when you left for college and then you have your first child and
Uh-huh.
you come out and tell your husband about this. We all know the book, The Body Keeps the Score. If there's something physical that has happened to you and you're holding some sort of trauma inside, you could push it down and try as hard as you want, but there will be likely physical manifestations making it clear that something is not right. For you, did that happen and what did that look like?
For sure. Yeah, that's probably one of the big things I guess really pushed my my healing forward. So I suffered from ulcers. So I carried everything on the inside. I suffered from ulcers where it lasted like over a year and I would just not stop bleeding. And I'd go to the doctor and luckily I had a good GI doctor and she would just say and she didn't know obviously what happened to me, but she just kept telling me, "You're not feeling your emotions. Like, you're not feeling your emotions, and your body is telling you you need to do it. You should be thankful that you get to see blood because that is giving you a warning that you need to do something." And so that was my physical manifestation and exactly that. It didn't go away until I addressed the feelings that I had as a child experiencing the trauma. And so I did that through and again, I did a lot of different work, but one of the things that I did to address that was inner child work. And for people who don't know what inner child work is, it takes you back to when you were a child experiencing trauma so you can feel what you were feeling at that time. And for me, it was that terrified little kid in the corner and the adult Alreen came to her and said, everything's going to be okay, right? You do have an adult looking after you now. Like the feelings, instead of like trying to suppress them, right? Make it go away. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. I've moved on. Instead of that, it was feeling it so that it could then dissipate. And I had like a huge energy release from like the tips of my toes to the tips of my fingers. My bleeding stopped after that. And so that was like a huge, I guess, pivotal moment of part of the healing. But the physical manifestations are real. I see that in other people as well, but it's really hard for people to connect the fact that their trauma could be showing up in physical ailments, right? It's easier to say, well, no, it's some other issue and I can take medicine and make it go away.
I have heard that different types of childhood trauma can actually manifest a lot as issues with the stomach and the gut.
Yes, I've been told that too.
In terms of your therapy, when was the first time that you took matters into your own hands, went into a therapist's office, and what would you say was the top number one treatment that you felt was successful?
So I started therapy probably when my daughter just turned 13. I think I started when she was like about 1. And what prompted me to go to therapy was because I wanted to be a better mom. I felt like I was missing out on her growth because I couldn't be present and just like her crying would trigger me. I was like uncomfortable around her, and I didn't want to be that person. So I went to therapy for that. The therapist specializes in child development, and my friends had seen him, and so I decided to go to him, and I got to therapy, and I told him, "Hey, I'm going to talk to you about what happened to me when I was a kid, and I'll come here for like 4 weeks. I think once a week for 4 weeks. You do what you do, and then I'll be on my way." And he just laughed like, "That's not how it works." But I really thought, to me, like, therapy was just another thing I checked off the box. I do it, I follow the rules, and I get better, and we move on, right? I thought he could like erase the memories, or I thought he could just fix it by me telling him, for 4 hours what happened to me. And the part of that, I think what was helpful is just processing, as a child, what you were experiencing, what the consequences of that were. So for example, being uncomfortable when my daughter cried, he's like, "Well, you were probably hit, when you cried, and you weren't allowed to cry. And so it's a triggering aspect for you, and that's what's making you uncomfortable." And so we kind of addressed, as we went through therapy, different things that I was feeling, and kind of drawing it back to where that might be coming from, right? Because it wasn't her crying that was bothering me. It was something from my past that was coming up.
So 2 years ago, you write a book telling the whole story. And although there were maybe a handful of people that you had shared this with beforehand, now you're coming out and sharing in detail what happened to you and your family in your childhood. Was there anything that you intentionally left out of the book?
I would say anything. I try to intentionally leave out as much as I could things about my family as much as possible, like things maybe that I have witnessed that didn't impact me. So I guess those were things that were intentionally left out. Besides that, no. I mean, I think I try to share as much as possible so people would understand where I'm coming from and why I do the work that I do, and why they can also, not continue to live in this way of suffering anymore. That was really the intent of the book. Is I want people to know they can speak out, and by speaking out they can heal themselves. But if they continue to keep it inside and not share it, not necessarily in a book or in some other way, the only person they continue hurting is themselves. You don't need to continue protecting, the person that harmed you.
Did you feel that writing the book and actually putting the words down and then, when it was publication day, was that healing for you?
For sure. Yeah. So I don't know if I again, when I picked up, I wasn't like, "Oh, I'm going to write a book to heal myself." But the process itself was very therapeutic, in the sense of each time you wrote it, you edited it, you read it, it had less and less of an impact on you. And I feel the same way as coming on a podcast talking about my experience. It's like this weight has been lifted, this whole like secret and this thing that I carried and I was so ashamed of and so scared to tell anybody, and it was so taboo. We don't talk about it. It was like killing me. And to not have that anymore, like, I feel free. Like, it allows me to live my best life and give back, in all these ways to all these people. So it just has allowed, I guess, me to like be comfortable in my own skin that I didn't recognize would be the effect. I thought, I had seen other people do it, but I didn't know it could have that feeling. Like, I didn't know what it would feel like, I guess, until it happened. Yes, it was very healing. Talking about it, even with you right now, is part of that.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of someone listening to this who has had a similar traumatic event happen in their childhood. They have to understand that this is a hour-long podcast where we just don't have the time to get into every nuanced moment and sad thought you had. And I do feel, though, that someone listening to this might hear the story and think, well, this woman is just so strong and she had this horrible thing happen, but she went to college, she met her husband, she had a kid, she moved on. Her life has been generally good despite this traumatic past. But I know from looking you up and knowing more about you and listening to you on other interviews, you went through a lot of darkness between then and now. There were times when you had thoughts of self-harm. There were times you didn't want to be here. And I'm sure it was not as, I don't want to say easy because you're not making it sound easy, but I'm sure it was a lot harder and a lot more rocky than we have the ability to paint in this interview.
I mean, I feel like that's always the case, right? Anytime you see someone's life, you think they had it easier or better, or they could do it because it's not you, and you're never going to be able to do it. And I used to think that way too, right? I would see like strong women who would walk in a room and feel so comfortable in just their being and like their presence, and I was like, well, it's different for them. They didn't have the same problems. They didn't have to endure this, and whatever I would tell myself to diminish it. I'm here to say, like, that's not true. Those are just thoughts, and you cannot believe all of your thoughts. Like, all your thoughts are not true. So you need to stop telling yourself that. Remind yourself that your thoughts are hindering you, and have the thoughts that you want to have, to change that belief system. Is it easy? No. Is it going to be a lot of work? Yes. Is it going to happen overnight? No. Like, it is a process, but you too can have it. And that's, I think, what's so amazing is that period of darkness. It lasted for a long time. And like now it's so foreign, right? Like when you look back, you're like, I don't even know who that person was. It was obviously me, but you don't even, just like I couldn't imagine feeling the way I do now, I can't imagine feeling the way I did then, if that makes sense. And that's what I think every person can experience if they are willing to go through the process of letting go and holding on to something that they think by saying it, they're going to either cause more harm or it's going to be so awful. But once they let it go, it only goes in an upward trajectory.
To the point of what you just said of how someone might be listening to this and thinking, my story's different and I could never do that. This all leads us to the fact that today you are a sexual harassment attorney and you spend your life and your career helping victims cope with this legally. I have one friend in my life who came to me a couple of years ago to tell me that when she was 10 or 11, that she was sexually abused by a member of her family. Aside from me and her therapist, she has not told anyone this. However, she did, through her therapy, bring it to her whole family and got everyone in the room, parents, siblings, and aired it. And they discussed it as a family. And I saw the change in her from where she was before to after she came out to me about that, and then after she managed it. And I would assume it's a lifelong management, but she talks about how much better she feels and how she actually doesn't know if she would be here today if that meeting didn't happen and if her coming forward didn't happen. It's sad to say, but I'm going to assume that there is at least one listener right now, maybe more, who have in their head one memory of something that happened to them once that they have been pushing down. And they've sort of always had the thought, am I going to talk about this at some point? I think I probably should, but there's all these excuses and reasons for why I better not. And I can imagine in the case where it's a family member or a loved one who has since stopped the behavior, and now you're just in a totally different stage of life, going back to that and bringing that up and telling everyone in the circle, it's so much, causing so much damage today that one might argue, well, they're done doing it and it's over and it's in the past. Leave it in the past. There's no need to ruin their whole life moving forward, and not only ruin their life, but probably disrupt the whole family system, and maybe everyone's lives are going to be ruined by this. And that's what a hard thing to carry around, to be the person who's the gatekeeper of ruining everyone's life just by doing the one thing that you need to do to heal yourself. What can you say to someone in the audience who's listening, who's trying to make the decision? Should I do that? Should I not? Is that going to ruin everything? Is my life going to be disrupted, or will it make it better? What is the right thing for them to do?
Wow, there's so many things to that. Okay, so one, I want to say with respect to your friend, I think that's amazing. And that's exactly what I see on a daily basis. I see women every single day who come into my office who feel hopeless and helpless, and they feel like they don't have a voice and they can't stand up and nobody's going to believe them. And this is going to be this awful thing when they stand up for themselves. And I promise you, every single woman that leaves at the end of it, they feel empowered. They are better off for speaking out. And again, I speak in a legal system. It doesn't have to be in a legal way. Your friend did it by having this family meeting. But I can tell you, for every person that I have met, including myself, by letting it out and not keeping it inside, you are going to be better off than you were. Life is short. You should be living your best life. And there's no reason to not do that. With respect to what you're saying about the bigger unpacking, right? The disruption to your family, hurting the person who's not doing it anymore, hurting their family, you know, all of those things. Yes, it's disruptive, right? But you are not the one who caused the harm. And why do you want to protect this person? And what I'm here to say is you can continue not say anything and you might not have a disruption in your life. Things can continue going status quo, but has status quo worked out for you, right? It wasn't working out for me. I wasn't able to live my best life, and for my daughter and for my husband and the people that I love the most, I wasn't able to show up in my best way. And so was it disruptive to my family? Yes, it was disruptive. Was I hurting them? No, I was not hurting them by letting out my truth and speaking about what happened to me. I didn't want to keep it a secret anymore because the people that hurt me had already taken so much from me. They weren't also going to take my relationship with my daughter and my husband that I had created.
I think also you alluded to it with your dad telling your sister that he would kill her.
Mhm.
I think that there's, in a lot of these cases, it's nuanced by the fact that it's not just holding in a secret in effort to not air everyone's dirty laundry, but it's also there's often a threat being made by the perpetrator. Oftentimes it is, if you tell anyone this, I will harm you or I will harm someone else. You feel like you have to carry around the weight of that and weigh that into your decision of, is this worth it? Are they actually going to do that? From your professional position now, being an attorney and being part of these cases, are threats like that a very common piece and a very common part of sexual assault cases, especially when it's in a family? And just to piggyback on that question, what are the stats about the amount of times that that threat is actually followed through?
So I don't know about the stats on how much the threats followed through, but the threat, somebody doesn't even have to threaten you like explicitly. You already feel that, you fear that. You feel like you will be harmed if you say anything. And that's, I think, a very normal behavior or normal feeling that every victim goes through. So I represent a lot of women in the workplace. So they are very afraid if they speak out, they are going to lose their job. They are going to lose the way they provide for their family. What are they going to do to pay their bills, right? So is it better to just keep their mouth shut, keep doing what they're doing in order to not lose their job? So that's a real fear. An employer hasn't said that, like the person hasn't expressly said that, but they already fear that. Same with women, even if not in the workplace, they are really afraid by coming forward, they are going to harm, let's say, their relationship. Like, what will my husband think, or what will my friends think, or what will society think? Like, they are afraid of their harm in their relationship in a real way, even if it's not death. And so what do I tell people when they come in? One, I say, well, it's illegal, right? Like it's against the law to do that to you for standing up. But that is a practical concern. Yes. Could they fire you? Yes. Would it be illegal? Yes. But how long are you going to endure this and have this affect you before you do say anything, right? And that's a choice they have to make and come to terms with.
One thing I've been thinking about is how something like this happening to you at home and then your mom staying silent about it at home must cause such a deep trust issue in a person. Who can I trust? I cannot trust any adult or any person in the world. But then you go off to college, and in your first encounter on your own, it seems you were able to find a healthy relationship that you got into, that you are still in today. How is it that you were able to trust a person, and how do you think you were able to find that type of positive relationship?
I think I got lucky. I don't know. My husband Mike is like the sweetest, kindest, most patient person. Did I trust him? No. At the beginning, I think I did every possible thing to push him away because I trusted that he would leave in
Mm.
some way. And so I think just seeing him show me what love looked like, what that is, I think really just shifted my perspective on being able to trust others. And same with my girlfriends, like it was a different relationship, one that I had never had. Like it wasn't, people don't they don't yell and scream. And it was just allowed me to see just a different life. And so when I got to college and had those relationships, I mean, I was on a high. I had thought I had moved on. And if I had continued feeling that way, I don't know if I would have ever said anything, but that didn't last, right? Like, so when I had my daughter, all of these things started coming back, the physical manifestations, the depression, and it was finally like something needed to change.
At what point did you make the decision to go into sexual harassment law?
Probably 5 years after I started, from when I became a lawyer. I always wanted to be a lawyer to advocate. We just talked about how silent my mom was, and the fact that when I saw something happen to my sister, I didn't say anything. I really do. I carried that a lot, and so wanting to stand up for people and be a voice, it was just like innately something I wanted to do, and that's why I'm so good at it, I think, is because it's like when I feel like people are being harmed, I want to protect them because I didn't do it then, and I can't keep my mouth shut and just let it go on.
Mm.
But yeah, I would say 5 years after I was working in a male-dominated field through litigation and a male-dominated firm, and I wanted something different, and I wanted to really hone in on protecting women more than the work that I was doing.
Do you ever feel triggered or like your trauma gets dug up when you're doing your work?
Yeah, not so much on the experiences, but early on in my career, I was constantly triggered, and it was like most of the people that I was dealing with were men. So, male judges, male opposing counsel, male
Mm.
defendants, and so I was constantly triggered by them. And part of the work professionally has been to identify that I'm being triggered, finding tools to calm myself down so I'm still very passionate and can be a good advocate without being a crazy, angry woman attacking them.
I mean, I can just imagine sitting in the courtroom hearing a male defendant defending a
Yeah.
clear perpetrator
Yeah.
of a crime or just, some sort of incredibly horrible abuse. And I cannot imagine how you keep your composure.
It's been a learning. I've been practicing law for 23 years, so I've developed the tools of how to maintain very passionate, but yeah, not come across angry, because it's not good advocacy if I'm just yelling at them.
And as the attorney, would you say that your primary goal or what gives you the most satisfaction is to get your clients compensated, or is it to put the other person away?
So I don't do any criminal work. I only do civil work. So I only take money in it. Yes. I would say 99% of the time it results in the person paying money. For me, what gives me the greatest satisfaction is when a woman is now empowered and feels like she has a voice to stand up for herself. And when I see that at the end of the case, I know I've done a good job. I can never take away what happened to you, but my job is to get you compensation so you can heal from the experience that you just had.
Right. Being a mom now and having a daughter, I want to talk about how you feel as her protector and if your past trauma has led to you having any stressors that maybe another person wouldn't have. And just to dive a little deeper into this, something I've been seeing a lot on social media is people coming forward talking about how if they were the victim of any sort of sexual abuse in their life, now that they have kids, they have a rule: no sleepovers. You are not allowed to go to someone's house. I don't want you near. If someone has a dad or a brother, we only sleep in our house. In your case, the abuse came from inside of the house. So, you're not going to tell your child there's no sleeping. But what have you translated from your childhood into adulthood, that rules you're giving your daughter or family rules that you're implementing that are a direct result of what you went through?
I think for me, it's like I don't implement the rules. We never talked in my household. I never had anybody like a mom or a dad to talk to about what I was going through and what I was feeling and what I was experiencing and what I was seeing. And so in my household, I talk to her and I trust her, and we have conversations about what's going on. And I talk to her about how I grew up. And I haven't gotten into my dad's abuse because I don't know if it's age appropriate yet. I think I'm probably going to get close to it when she's ready, really, and wants to have that discussion. But we have a lot of conversations and we sit down and we talk about it. So for example, sleepover is a great example. Just how to stay safe and how to make sure you're speaking out if anything makes you uncomfortable, or you call us if you don't want to stay. And so I think just building the relationship where she can talk about anything and she knows she can call us no matter what is what's really important. So I don't have a lot of rules because I don't think, one, they worked for me. And I just really want to have a relationship with her where she trusts me to talk and about the various things going on at 13.
I heard a podcast. I wish I could remember exactly what it was. It may have been Mel Robbins. She was talking about a situation of being young and having something had happened to her. I really hope it's Mel Robbins, otherwise I'm putting trauma on someone. But let's say it's not her. Someone was telling a story of how they were young and something traumatic happened that they remembered. I think they were on a family vacation and it was a family friend. They stayed silent and never told their parents about it. And she was talking to a therapist about this live on the podcast. And the therapist said, obviously, you went through some sort of physical trauma with this incident, but actually, the trauma in your life started before this incident with the fact that you did not have the relationship with your parents where you could come forward and tell them that this happened. So, yes, we're not taking away the fact that the incident was traumatic, but the actual trauma lies in the fact that you did not feel that you could step forward.
Yes.
And so, how are you, especially having a daughter, how are you setting that groundwork for her? And what are the types of things you say to her at home so that those lines of communication remain open?
So we model it, right? We model it. My husband and I model it right to her in the way we communicate. We have family meetings. When she tells us things, we don't shut her down or yell at her or make her feel, shame and guilt about doing it. That's what's, I think, amazing, that you can stop generational trauma and you can stop. I had an opportunity to stop, the trauma that my mom experienced, what her mom experienced, by creating something different with my daughter. And I did it through my own work, through therapy. I did it through work, doing parenting classes and learning a new way. And so we do it by talking to her about what we went through, right? Like, hey, when we we were like made to feel guilty and ashamed of every thought and conversation we had, or we got yelled at for even thinking it, and that's so foreign for her. And so we talk to her about how we grow up, and then we model it. And then when she tells us something, we listen to her as opposed to shouting back or telling her what to do.
Right. That's really helpful advice. How did your dad pass?
He had a brain tumor and they tried to remove it surgically, and he didn't make it past the surgery. And he was about 78 years old when he passed.
What was that like for you?
So I was the closest to my dad, believe it or not. So out of all of the siblings, he spoke to me the most about what was going on in his life. And I was there at the hospital with him, and all of the siblings were. And when he passed, we surrounded him in a circle, said prayers, and said goodbye to him. It was hard. I would say it was the first time I had experienced like death of somebody close to me. And I definitely felt it in my heart. It wasn't like, oh, I was relieved this person was dead or anything. And my therapist always brings this up. She's always like, you should be really angry at your dad. I'm like, I don't know if I'm angry. It's just, I don't know. I feel, I think, sorry for him to some degree of however he lived his life. And I wish he was able to experience his kids in a different way.
Do you know if he was the victim of any abuse?
I don't know if he was, he never talked about it, but, he left, a communist country. He was born in Burma. He left a communist country. He left all of his belongings behind. He moved his family across, 3 different countries to provide something better for them. So I don't know how his upbringing was, but all of that couldn't have been easy.
Yeah. It's incredibly nuanced because on the one hand, you hear your therapist telling you should be angry, and I'm sure there is some anger, but you're the only one who knows the breadth of your full life experiences, and you're the only one who can feel all the other emotions of being his
Yeah.
daughter. From the outside, I didn't know your dad, so I hear you tell the story and I think, what a horrible man.
Right.
And then there's so much more to a person than that. And it's easier to say to a person like you who also feels that way.
Right.
But it really is so complicated.
I agree. And so my therapist says it's Stockholm syndrome, and where I relate to him. And it's like, I don't know. It is complicated. I don't know what to say about it. Yeah. It was close to him till the end, in the sense of like closer to him than my mom, right? My mom barely speaks English, so she would never be the person I would talk to.
When you think about the Alreen standing next to him, crying that he's passing and praying for him and being there for
Yeah.
him, standing next to the Alreen who's being abused by him, does that just feel like two different people?
Yeah. Because when I
Mm.
was standing next to him when he was passing, I was older. I had, finished law school. I had my career. I was with my husband. And like I said, I think at that time I felt bad for him. I think now if he was living now and I'd come out with my book, I think I would be telling him what he did, and how he hurt us and how it's affected us and hope he would take some responsibility to some degree of it.
Well, Alreen, this is such a powerful story, such a positive ending. And the fact that you now advocate for people who are in similar situations, I would say is the best possible outcome and the best use of your voice today. Can you tell our audience where they can find you, tell them about your book and where they can buy it, and if they need to work with you as an attorney, how can they contact you?
Yeah, I think the easiest for all three of those things is on my website. It's Alreen, ALREEN.com. You can get my book there.
Oh, you got allreen.com.
I do.
Good domain.
Thank you. Yeah, so you can find me there. I always love to connect. And I just really want to see people live their best life and not be held back by some event that happened to them.
Thank you so much for coming on and for sharing this with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Real Stuff podcast. If you're liking the show, please head over to Apple or Spotify and leave the show a written review. If you're watching on YouTube, drop a comment down below and join in the conversation. And if you're feeling called to be a guest on the show, visit luciefink.com/apply and tell us your story. Thank you so much for sharing your time and your attention with us, and we will see you next time on the Real Stuff podcast.
Please note that this episode may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products and services. Individuals on the show may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to in this episode.